Well, it was an interesting, almost an enigma, because I guess I was about 5 years old in the first grade. We had a school festival, and one of the fathers in the PTA had an Army Jeep. And he brought it for more or less a ride for all the kids to come around, and I rode in it. And from that day on, for the last 62 years, I've been hooked on Jeeps. In fact, I was so taken with the Jeep, and not knowing anything about them at that time, for my birthday, my parents gave me a 1952 Metal Marks Jeep, which the hood raised, and you could put a battery in, the headlights worked, and so forth, which I still have. Oddly enough, I bought a Jeep, and of course I shouldn't use the brand X name Jeep, but I bought a new one in 1973, which I still have, and I'm restoring it now. But over the years I got into a lot of restoring old cars and this, that, and the other, but I always wanted an American Bantam, and I finally found one with help from Norm Booth and Bill Spear and Dick Beagle and Lynn James and some of the other fellows. And really didn't know the history of the Jeep until I got into the Bantams, and I had bought my first Roadster, and then I got the Woody, and with Lynn and Mike's help I got the pickup. And in learning and reading a lot from what Bill Spear had done, I realized how significant the BRC was in the Jeep world. So I began a search for a BRC, realizing that they're not on eBay every week like some of the other cars. But I found out that there was one in Ohio that an old fellow named George Milne had found in a service station in Arkansas, and he had bought it back in the early 70s. It was a service station vehicle, and he bought it and restored it, well, I think with the help of his brother or his son, I'm not sure. And as everybody in the club may know, I live in North Carolina, and he was at that time in Ohio. Well, I heard through the grapevine that George's one of his relatives had died, and he had inherited a farm in North Carolina, and he was selling his place in Ohio and moving to North Carolina. So, not missing an opportunity, I called George, finally got in touch with him and welcomed him to the neighborhood, although he was about an hour and a half from here. And I said, oh, and by the way, George, and I'd mentioned it to him a couple of times, that if he ever wanted to sell the BRC, I'd like to have first opportunity. And not knowing if he would ever remember that, but each time I talked to him, I'd bring that up and remind him. So, gosh, so I guess over the period of 4, 5, or 6 years, I'd occasionally have a reason to converse with him, and I'd mention it maybe once a year, once every 2 yeyears. But one Saturday morning about 10:30 the phone rang, and I answered the phone, and he said, Jim, this is George Milne. I said, hello, George, and I was hoping it was the call I was waiting for. And sure enough, he said, are you interested in this Jeep? And I said, I sure am. He said, well, I'm going to sell it, and he quoted me the price. He said, it's not negotiable. He said, take it or leave it, and you need to come look at it. And I said, George, I'll be there in an hour and a half, because that's how long it takes me to drive to Mebane from where I live. He said, no, don't come today. This was Saturday morning. He said, come tomorrow after church. So at 1 o'clock, I was sitting in his driveway with the trailer behind my car, because I was going to take the Jeep home. And Pam said, are you going to take the trailer? I said, yeah, I'm bringing that BRC home. She said, well, if you take your trailer, he knows he's got you hooked. And I said, well, he knows I'm hooked already after 5 or 6 years. So anyway, long story short, the BRC, he had done almost I'd say a 95% restore on it, very accurately. And it was in the barn, an old wooden barn, and under an old dirty tarp. So he hadn't prepared it for me to be there or anything else. We pulled the tarp off, pumped up one of the tires, pushed it out beyond the barn, and of course the battery was dead. We jumped it off, it fired right up. I drove it around his cow pasture, bought it, and brought it home. Worked on it and finished the few issues that it needed, and took it and been real fortunate. It's won several awards, MVPA Grand Master Gold and AACA Grand National and so forth. And I'm sure some of our friends in Texas would agree that it's a decent restore. Most of the pieces on it are original. Some of the body tub parts are not. Engine's original, and carburetor and so forth. Front end, all the spicers original. Overall, it's a very nice, solid BRC. I'm proud to own it. This book by David Featherston was probably the first and most authoritative book on the history of the Jeep. And as information, the chapter 1, which rightly so for the BRC, talks about the design concepts and how they built the pilot cars, tested it, and then when it gets into the production BRC 40, number 1838, which is this Jeep, is the one in David Featherston's book. And it goes on to talk about all the aspects of it and the quartermaster core and the ups and downs with Bantam and delivery dates and so forth. But it's a good picture history of this, along with a lot of Department of Defense photographs of testing and in use and that sort of thing. And then, of course, after that, it goes into the Willis. The MVPA wanted to centerpiece our, when I say our, the BRC and its history in terms of the Jeep. And Duncan had just finished his pilot recreation. And the president of MVPA called me to ask me if I would bring my 40, because he said Duncan wouldn't come if I didn't come. So I said sure, never wanting to miss a car show. Duncan had his there, and I took mine, and they were centerpiece. And when I got there, they asked me if I wanted to have mine judged, and I thought, well, these guys are serious at MVPA. But sure, I see how accurate a job I had done, because I had some of the parts reproduced myself and that sort of thing from originals. And they checked the thing out, and they checked the engine and the lights and the horn and all the mechanicals, and then they come around and judge it. There were 57 Willys in the class that I was in at Topeka. This was back in, I believe, 2010, Topeka, Kansas. And I didn't know what to expect, never having anything judged at MVPA. Well, as it turned out, I won Master Gold, which was best in class, which I'm sure the Willys guys didn't like. But anyway, I was real pleased, and I know Duncan and all the other BRC guys, Terry and everybody, Bill, were tickled at that. It's a real treasure for me to own it. And it's like, for those that know Dick Beagle, and of course everybody knows Norm, they reminded me early on when I first got into Bantams that we're not owners of these cars, we're just caretakers of history. So I'm doing my part.